I don't know if you have ever seen a full-size elephant. I'm not talking about a photo of a full-size elephant. I'm talking about going to the zoo. I come from San Diego, and in San Diego we have a big zoo, and in that big zoo you can actually stand 5 feet from a monstrous elephant. They even let little kids get on and take rides with the elephant. I don't know if you know this, but an elephant weighs, full-sized, 24,000 pounds. Think about that. 24. I could have told you 10,000, and you still would have been like, whoa. It's 24,000 pounds. More amazing than that is that an elephant can be chained, locked up, given 6 feet of rope or chain, and held up by a peg that weighs less than a pound. And you go, what? How's that possible? He's 24,000 pounds. He looks at the peg, he shakes his leg, the peg comes flying out, and he can go anywhere he wants. And yet, if you visit a zoo, maybe if you're the kind of person that has such a creature in your backyard, you could hold that elephant locked in place by a tiny rope and a small peg. And the reason is because you don't put the brace or the chain onto the elephant when they weigh 24,000 pounds. You put the rope and the peg or the chain on the baby elephant. And for the first several days and weeks, the baby elephant pulls against that peg, yanks against the peg, trying to get free, and discovers they can't pull the peg out of the ground. And as the baby elephant gets bigger and older, they've resigned themselves completely to the fact that they're locked up. 24,000 pounds of strength. I don't know if you know, an elephant with its trunk can pick a single blade of grass. That's the kind of control they have. They can use the same trunk to pull down an entire tree. But they're held by the equivalence of a piece of kite string simply because as a baby, they got told something, they experienced something, a constraint that locked them up to the point that for the rest of their lives, they believed it to be true. And the question I have for you this morning is, what if we're held back? What if you and I are held back by thinking and lies that aren't accurate today? This is a picture of Denia, Spain. It's in the southern eastern part of Spain. It's on the coast. It's beautiful. It is a gorgeous. There's a 5-star resort there, and that 5-star resort has a 5-star restaurant in the resort. It also has a 5-star golf course on the premises. It is the quintessential location for golfers. If you know a Spanish golfer named Sergio, this is where he plays. And the golf course there, just outside of Denia, is and has been a European PGA stop. I don't know if you've ever golfed, but the owner of the golf course and resort was also the owner of one of my startup companies, and so I flew out there. I got to see this. This was gorgeous. I got to hang out at the resort, and one day at lunch he said, "Do you golf?" I think he was talking about this. And I was like, "No, I don't know anything about golf. I suck at golf." And he said, "Great, I have a pro. He'll teach you this Saturday morning at 7 a.m. Saturdays at 7 a.m. are kind of like Saturdays at 8 and 9 a.m. for me. I like to sleep. So I was up at 7 a.m. and I was on this golf course with a pro, and the golf instructor there, the pro, said, okay, here's what you want to do. You want to take that club, you want to hold it a certain way, you want to pull it all the way back, and you want to bring it through and follow through, and you end over here. And you go, okay, all right. And he said, no, you're doing it wrong. What do you mean? He said, well, look at this guy. And he pointed to a guy further down the way. He said, you notice that as he's moving through the ball, as he's swinging the club, his hips are moving, the weight distribution is changing, it's shifting. And so when you start back here, when you pull the club up, 80% of your body weight is sitting on the back leg, on your right leg, 20% on your left. As you bring it through, it evens out. As you follow through, you have 90% of your weight on your left foot and only 10% on the right. Like, I'm sorry, it's 7:30 in the morning. I don't do math this early. I said, no. And he walked it through again, and he said, just look at this guy. And so he pointed to him, and he says, you see that when he's done, you see that his foot turns up, and he's on his tippy toe right there? Because he doesn't have any weight on that leg. I said, all right, let me try it again. I have some friends in the room that snowboard. This is my friend Sandy. She's walking around on crutches with a boot. I'll let her tell you the story. Imagine telling someone who's a snowboarder that what you want to do when you take off and you catch air, you want 20% of your weight on your right foot, 80% of your weight on your front foot, and then as you start catching a little more air, if you're 2 seconds in the air, then I want you to turn and twist your hips 33 degrees, and then you want to put 50% on your back, 50%. Does anybody do that? I keep approximately 50% of my weight on the right side and 50% of my weight on the left side all the time. Makes it very easy. See, golf, skiing, snowboarding, surfing. We can't instruct people to do these kinds of activities as if we were building a chair. Because it doesn't work that way. A chair is physical and finite. It's structured. It has 4 legs that are the equal size. If you make a chair with 4 legs and one is longer or bigger, you're going to have a problem. You don't need creativity once the first chair is done because you're like, just do it again and again and again. Look, there's 4 others that look just like it. That's on purpose. There's no creativity in creating those because you've built one already. In this game, you can talk about measurement. In this game, you can talk about structure. But a lot of what we do is not that way. If you take a look at this picture here, this is Lahaina in Maui. How many of you have ever been to Maui? The rest of you need to get a life. Stop working so much. Travel. This is Lahaina. This is, right here, this spot right here, you can't really read the sign, but that is cheeseburgers in paradise. And I've eaten 2 cheeseburgers in paradise. Not in the same sitting. I know some of you are looking at me and going, 2 different visits. The first visit was 11 years ago. I met the most amazing woman, so I married her, and we went on a honeymoon that started in Maui. And we went to Maui, and we spent time in Maui, but we got off the plane, we took a drive to our resort, we dropped off our stuff, we went driving, and we found ourselves in Lahaina. So we had a burger there, a cheeseburger in paradise. It was a good burger. I'm not sure it was a paradise-like burger, but it was still a good one. And we sat outdoors, and we watched the ocean, and we're like, this is beautiful and amazing. And then we walked across the street, and right over here in this corner, almost off the screen, is a gallery, and we walked into that gallery. We walked into a couple, but we walked into that gallery. As we walked in the gallery, we found a painting that was amazing. It was gorgeous. It was incredible. It did so much for me in my brain as I was looking at all the different nuances of it that I'm like, I have to have it. It was several $1,000s. It was also the first day of our honeymoon. A pro tip to anyone who's about to get married, don't spend all your money on the first day of your honeymoon. I was not that dumb, so I just said, could you give me a card? Could you write it all down, all the information? And when we're done with our honeymoon, we get back home, I'll call and order it. They gave me the card, put it in. We spent the rest of the week in Maui. It was gorgeous. It was beautiful. It was amazing. And then we went on to Cabo, spent another week in Cabo, because if you're going to do a honeymoon, pro tip, do 2 weeks. It's better than 1. And then we went home. And somewhere in the process, I lost the card. 11 years ago, I lost the card. I had no idea who the artist was, and I had no idea the name of this painting. It was a painting of a clock. It was the backside of the clock. There were gears on that clock. The clock had a sun in the background because this clock was sitting larger than life on the earth, but there was a sun in the back, except there was a long line coming out from the sun, which made it look like a pendulum. So it was kind of like the earth was the clock, but then the clock is right there, and then there's a ladder right against the back of the clock, and there is a guy standing on the ladder who's kind of adjusting and orchestrating the gears in this thing, and you're like, that's amazing. And there's so much going on, and there's symbolism and everything else, and I wanted that. And so every year, for the last 11 years, I've gone online and searched. The poor people at posters.com are wondering when I'm going to make a purchase. They dropped a cookie on my computer so long ago, they're like, he's back. He did 42 searches on things like clock and fixing clock and big earth clock pendulum, and he hasn't bought a darn thing. I kept going and looking and searching every which way, and I couldn't find it. This year in February, I took my wife for her birthday back to Maui. We hadn't been in 11 years. They happened to have a word camp Maui there, and so I went to speak, and I said, why don't you come with me, and let's actually, what I said was, honey, I'm taking you to Maui. And she said, when? I said, February, Valentine's Day, for your birthday. She's like, is there a word camp? Focus on the essentials, babe. We're going to Maui. I took her to Maui. We got off the plane. You know where the first place we went? Cheeseburger in Paradise. We drove through Lahaina. We stopped. We ate the burger, and we went across. And I started walking through different galleries trying to find it. And I'm like, I was a kid in a candy store. Honey, we're going to find it. We're going to find it. She's like, it's been 11 years, and that painting's not on the wall. I'm like, no, but we'll find it. And I walked into that gallery, and I knew right away. I'm like, this is it. This is the place. The high ceilings, the architecture. I had it in my head because I knew that place. And I start walking through the place, and I finally find the section of surreal art. And I'm looking at the art, and I'm like, it's this guy. I know, because this is the only style like it that I've seen. This is it. I didn't know there's a whole realm of painting called surrealism. I didn't know that. So, like, this is it. So the person comes over to help me, and I'm like, okay, please, I need to know all of this guy's art. And so they hand me a book. It had 300 pages, 300 different pieces of art he'd done. I looked through every single one. It wasn't there. But they were like, this guy looks like he wants to buy something, so let's bring the manager over. So the manager comes over, and I start telling him my story 11 years ago. He's like, well, this guy that we have on the wall, he's only been here for 8 years. I'm like, no, it was 11 years ago. I know how long I've been married. 11 years ago, we found it here. It's a clock. It's one of those old clocks that has a little bell on the top for the alarm. It's the backside. There's gears. There's a guy leaning up against the ladder, and he's tweaking. And he's like, you know, the surrealist that we had here before that is a guy named Cush. He actually is just 2 doors down. But you may be talking about Millennium. And I'm like, no, it's not called Millennium. I can tell you that right now because there was symbolism even in the name, and it wasn't that. And he's like, well, let me go look it up. He's like, I'm sorry, it's called Millennium Watchman. And I'm like, yeah, Watchman, that's right, okay. So we went 2 doors down. I don't know how many of you pray before walking into an art gallery, but I prayed. I wanted it. This is it in my house. It's awesome. It's very hard to see that little guy standing at the top of the ladder against those gears doing work. But the reason I love this piece of art so much is because what it does is it reminds me of, and you probably have this feeling too when you look at it. The moment I say it, you're going to be like, totally. This is the mechanistic, machine-oriented perspective of the earth that started in the 17th century by Isaac Newton. Don't you get that too? Pretty much everybody does, yeah. They come into the house and they're like, 17th century Newtonian concept, I like it. Here's the thing. Unfortunately, most of us are still caught up in 17th century thinking. Newtonian physics. I was walking outside right before my talk about an hour ago, and two guys were standing there. I don't know if they're in the room because maybe I scared them off. But they were looking at the board, and they're looking at the titles, and they're like, we don't build chairs. And they turn, and they're like, oh, it's you. And I said, yeah. And he said, can you give me a short version of what the talk's about? I said, yeah, we're comparing Newtonian physics with quantum physics. And the guys are like, oh, that's a good one. Okay, so really, what's it about? And I looked at my buddy who was with me, and I'm like, tell, and he's like, no, he's being serious. That's what he's going to do. You're all 17th century experts. You know how I know? Let's do a quiz. Okay, if I say cause and, you say? You're good. If I say break big problems into smaller problems, yeah. That right there, those two phrases are classic 17th century Newtonian physics. It's the perspective that we can break things apart to understand them. If I broke my wife apart, I would not understand her any better. I'd get broke. She'd break me in half, right, even before I tried. There's things that don't work this way. And yet, we think cause and effect is always in play. And I'm going to show you that cause and effect is not always in play. And more importantly, it's not always not in play. It may only exist after the fact. And we go, wait, what? And yet Niels Bohr, turn of the last century, almost killed himself because every experiment he was doing, now on subatomic particles, but every experiment he was doing, it wasn't turning out right. He's like, the rules that we know are not working, and he's depressed. He's like, this doesn't make sense. And it turns out, over the last century, we discovered a whole lot about science that we didn't know before. And we all been walking around living in a 17th century world. Our world is not a machine. And people are not machines. And I know that you would agree with me. I know there's not a single person in here who would say people are machines. And if you are the kind of person, don't raise your hand right now if they're sitting next to you. We all say, no, people aren't machines. And yet, we treat them like machines. We treat their work product like machines. We don't even call them people. Sometimes we call them resources. Not you, other people. Other people like Base Camp. Ever been to Base Camp? Base Camp says, look, we'll take your chaos and we'll organize it. As if chaos was a bad thing. When in fact, in the quantum physics world of things, we'll talk about it later, chaos can be quite powerful and useful. And we see it in nature too. We'll get there. But I don't know if you've ever worked with Base Camp. Now, there are ways to use Basecamp. I don't want to go all out against Basecamp because there's ways to use Basecamp that are great. But have you ever known someone who is a manager of people who goes into Basecamp and literally says, this is what you're going to work on today, and creates 15 tasks and then goes into the expected time and starts putting 10 minutes, 25 minutes, 48 minutes, 16 minutes, and you're like, oh my God. Anyone ever known people like that? Oh, the rest of you are so awesome. I worked with a friend who was planting a church, and he said, I just got on this thing called Basecamp. I'm like, awesome. He goes, the guy who's helping me plant my church, he sent me a task list in Basecamp. I'm like, awesome. How many things are on there? Now, before you guess, right, I have helped a couple churches get planted, so I know, roughly speaking, there's probably between 100 and 200 things you got to do to get it right. I'm like, how big is your list? He's like, only 3,400. Whoever set that list up for him wasn't treating him like a person, right? And they were taking the concept of building something or doing something, and they were breaking it up into lots of little chunks, because that's classic 17th century Newtonian physics. That's the world we're living in. That's the world we're talking about. That's the way we act. And yet, there's a new science. We all love predictability and control. We love it. We love it. We love it, even when it doesn't help us. How many of you like project plans? Oh, come on. Come on. I'll just wait. We can sit here all day. Yeah, see? Yeah, we're going to talk about you in a second. But before we talk about quantum mechanics, do you mind if we talk about Legos for a second? How many people love Legos? Great. How many people like thought experiments? Less of you. I understand. Let's do it. Here we go. I want you to imagine in your mind that you're going to get placed at a table with a team of people, and this actually has happened. You sit at a table, a whole pile of Legos are in the middle, and I give you these instructions. I tell you, you need to sort the bricks into colors as quickly as possible and create one heap for all the special pieces. I haven't told you what are special pieces, but I need you to do this task. How many people think this would take a lot of time? You're right, it doesn't. It's really fast and easy. This is what we would call a simple context. Everybody knows the rules are self-evident. If you walk out, you're in a new place, maybe you're traveling and visiting, you've never been to Denver before, you walk out onto the street, and there are cars going this way and cars going that way. You don't need to read a manual to figure out, if I want to go this way, the best practice is to get in this lane to go this way. Because if I get in this lane to go this way, there could be a lot of problems. That is a simple context. The rules, the strategies, and everything else, cause and effect, are very clear, and it's self-evident. You don't need a guide. You don't need an expert. You don't need anyone to tell you anything. This is a very, very fast experiment. Very easy to do. Let's make it a little harder. I want you now to build a structure. And I want you to build a structure with at least 20 pieces tall. And I want you to create a color pattern. Okay? And as you go up the tower, the piece above the last piece has to be equal or smaller than the piece below it. Does that make sense? How many people think this is a super hard one? It's not really hard, but it does change the dynamics. If you were videotaping the first group would be like, I'll take orange, I'll take blue, okay, here, okay, I got my part, okay, what do we want special? I think special should be anything that isn't, this kind of block. Okay, great, let's put them all in there. Okay, we're done. In this one, normally what you see is not a group of people talking through and all figuring out together. In this one, normally, someone decides what the color pattern is. One expert says, oh, you know what, you want to do it like this? You need to use just, you're not going to want the single row character. You're going to want the two lines of pieces. There's probably a technical term for that brick. But you want the too thick across by long, and then we'll just shrink it as it goes up. And so you have an expert. You have someone who's explaining how to think about this right. Everyone else listens and goes, sounds about right. Okay, boom, and then they go. Right? Super easy to do. You can see a tower there. Very simple strategy. Someone has to pick, let's do blue and white. But it's not hard. By the way, we call that a complicated space. Right? It's still ordered. Cause and effect are still in play, but sometimes in terms of that world, maybe you need an expert to guide you through it, help you navigate. Then we get into complex, and I tell you, okay, you have 30 seconds to decide. Okay? Are you building an animal or a vehicle? After 30 seconds, there's no more talking. On top of that, right, you need a regular color pattern like before, but each piece of color can only be touched by a single person. And every minute, I'm going to move your team and what you're working on to a different table, which will have different pieces. This is not complicated. This is not simple. This is complex. And this kind of problem doesn't work, even if I gave you not just 30 seconds to plan, even if I gave you a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, because talking about it will not help solve this problem. You have to start trying things. The moment you start building, interacting, you're testing things, you start getting more comfortable, like, okay, I got it, we're figuring it out. Cause and effect here don't exist up front. Cause and effect are only something you can see retroactively. You can look back and say, why did this team, like you have different tables, and one team it works, and another team it works, and another team it works, and 3 teams it fails, and then you say, why did it work or not work? And they talk, and then they're like, oh yeah, it was because this is what he did, or this is how we did this, and you can look back and see the emergence of a strategy, but you could not have defined it up front. Does that make sense? And then there's the chaotic one. 30 seconds to decide if you're going to do a building, right, or a plant. This gets really complicated if you don't know plants, because someone says the name of a plant, and everyone's like, okay, and then they realize halfway through, they're like, I don't know anything about that plant. Everybody just kind of stops. But what's worse is you still can't talk. You still got all the different constraints, right? Each color can only be touched. But I could walk up to someone on your table, on your team, and I could say, you go to that table. And you just lost someone on your team. And then I walk up to another table and, hey, you go to that table. And very quickly, all the teams get demoralized. Like, we just lost our best guy, or we lost the person who was figuring this out, or we've gone through 3 people already. This is horrible. This is chaos. Cause and effect don't exist at all. Now I'm telling you about Legos, but you know this world already. In the help desk world, what do you do with a help desk, right? Ticket comes in, and what do? You categorize it. That is the function of simple cases. You categorize it so that you know what situation you're in. And once you've categorized it, you're like, I know what to do now. I have pre-written scripts, right? Cause and effect totally exists. We go to complicated, right? Go code a WordPress plugin. There's no one right way. There are several right ways, but there are definitely wrong ways, right? You can't have best practice here. You can only have good practice, because there's no one right answer. There are many. Cause and effect do exist, yet you will likely need someone to come and guide you. If you've ever built a plugin without any help before, and then published it somewhere and said, hey, look at my code, you get the joy, the true joy, of thousands of comments on GitHub and or pull requests to show you how stupid you were. And you're like, I need a guide. But the moment you get one person who comes alongside you and helps you, or you show up to Pippin's website and you read tutorials, you're like, oh, I have a guide, I have an expert, someone's explained it to me. Now cause and effect that existed, but they were hidden, now cause and effect is known, and I can do my work. Well, building a brand via blogging or video, right? When they introduce me, and if you know me, you know I write a blog, and someone will say, hey, stand up on stage and talk about how you built a brand through your blog. Here's the problem. Anybody who gets on stage and talks about how they did anything where cause and effect are only understood retroactively is selling you a bill of goods. You know why? Because you could do the same thing I did and it may not work. If I told you, write a blog post every single day, change it between 4 topics, and then you'll be famous. It doesn't work that way. In fact, what happens is, because cause and effect aren't clear until you're looking back retroactively, I have to look back and say, well, I think this probably helped. I think this probably helped. Maybe this would work. But there are no absolutes. Ask a person that's snowboarding to go down the same run twice. They will not run the same track. They will not go down the exact same path. And when they do something in the air, like flip and they twirl and they do these things, and you go, wait, tell me, how did you do that? Walk me through the exact steps. They're like, I took off in the air and I twisted. I Like, I can't tell you in advance. Like, here, just go in the air and then twist, and you'll look good, right? It's not how it works. You have to look back and say, well, I think what was going on is particularly, it was this kind of day and this kind of visibility, and this was going on, and this is the kind of experience I've had, and this, you can look back. And then, chaos, right? You've never had this happen to you, I'm sure, but other people who build websites for other people sometimes have a client call, and it's total chaos. They're screaming, they're crying, they're complaining, they're going to sue you. There is no cause and effect. There is no logic in that moment. You're just going to act. See, in complex, we probe, we experiment, we try things. If it works, we try it again. If it works again, then we're like, ooh, this kind of works. With chaos, we don't do that. With chaos, we just like, look, I'm going to act. I'm going to do something. And it's either going to succeed or fail, and then we're going to act again until we try and move it from chaos to complex or chaos to complicated, or maybe, if you're lucky, chaos to simple. We all like perfect project plans. We think they'll save the day. They won't. Because a perfect project plan presumes that you're living in a world that is highly ordered, either simple or complicated. And yet, no matter what we call software engineering, no matter how many terms we put like engineering to make it sound very, very structured and official, most of what we do is art. I'm not just talking about designers, though they do art too, but even developers. There are 14 different ways to solve an algorithm, to design an algorithm, to do whatever you're doing. In fact, the only people that don't do art are the ones that create this design and the look of the website where the first full page is a full photo that also has a black layered on top of it, and then a small bit of white text. Am I describing your websites yet? And then you scroll down, and there's a bar of color with a little bit of line of text, and then you scroll, and you're like, that's not creative at all. No, it's simple. You can get it at ThemeForest for $69. See, we've been living with a lie that's held us back. We've been living with 17th century Newtonian physics thinking, if I just break it down into smaller pieces, if I just put structure around it, if I just tell people exactly what to do, treat them slightly like machines, we will have a perfect outcome. Let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever created the perfect statement of work, put it in front of the customer and said, if we do this way, by this time, for this much money, you will be happy, sign here, they sign, you deliver everything, you get to the point where they're supposed to be happy, and they're not happy. I'm waiting for your hands to all go up. Right? We've all lived in that world, and yet we're thinking cause and effect work, and they don't. In all cases. Cause and effect work in some situations, not in all. And when we treat all situations like they will, we're living this lie of 17th century Newtonian physics. Control of people, of process, and of projects is not the answer. It's not about control. That will never work. So I told you we would talk about quantum physics. I don't want to spend a lot of time on quantum physics, no matter how much I like it, because I could put you all to sleep quickly. But I want to tell you some of the strange things, because they're crazy, and yet they exist. They work. They're proven. In fact, quantum physics and quantum theory and quantum mechanics is the most thoroughly tested science that we've ever had in the history of science, and yet we still don't understand it. Imagine I take a top, and I spin it over here, and it's spinning, and I walk over and I grab a second top and I spin it over here. And then I ask you to go check on that one over there, and I say, hey, which way is that top spinning? And you say, it's spinning to the right. And I say, this one's spinning to the left. So I stop this one, I spin it to the right. I say, hey, what's going on over there? They're like, well, now that one's spinning to the left. And you go, what? It's true. This is called entanglement. Things far apart that are unrelated are somehow connected. It's crazy, but it's true. Strong attractors is the chaos I was talking about. You'll see this whirlwind of chaos. Things are moving and changing just crazily, yet still in a bounded space and never departs from that space. And you think, how does this work? If you know the answer, you probably get a Nobel Prize. Because we don't know. But we know it's true. The whole versus the part. When we break something up, I started my career at Berkeley National Lab. It's a Department of Energy funded lab. They would take electrons and spin them up, get them so fast running around in what's called a particle accelerator that when they hit, they would break open. And for a femtosecond, and yeah, that's a real term, because I was standing in a room and I said, hey, when those hit, how long do you have to measure all the changes? And she goes, probably about a femtosecond. I'm like, I'm going to assume that's pretty short. I'm not a scientist, but I'm going to assume that's like really short. And they're like, yeah, we have a femtosecond and we can capture everything that's happened. And you know what you discover? When you break things apart, the new things that show up are new. They're not smaller pieces of the whole. They're fundamentally different things. And that's real. And lastly, another interesting angle on this thing is the moment you go to observe it, you change it. Can you imagine how frustrating that is? I'm going to come over here and I'm going to measure. Wait, where'd it go? Oh, it's right over here. I just want to take a snapshot. Right? It's crazy. There are no parties that are like, hey, I got no skin in this game. I just want to take a look at something. Every single interaction, every single entity involved is a participant that has impact and change. I don't know about you, but in organizations, sometimes we say, these are the people that make things happen, and these people, not so much. Every single participant has impact, no matter what. There are no neutral parties. At this point, you're like, okay, so what? Well, I started by telling you the title of the talk was about building chairs, and the reality is, if you're building a custom chair, if you're a woodworker that's going to carve something, it's not going to look like these. You might spend a year or two designing something, building something, crafting something, and I don't want to take anything away from the people that do that. But do you know that these chairs now can be built by robots? Because it turns out you can push wood or metal down a conveyor belt and something can chop it at exactly the right length, and they can take them and get them drilled, connected. Folks, the world is changing whether or not you like it or know it. There is an engine out there called, I think, the Grid. It's going to build websites using artificial intelligence. And I'm not lying. It's real. And the truth is, I built an engine like that 10 years ago. This stuff isn't new. It's happening. The fact that we're not ready for it is immaterial. It's happening. The non-creative work of assemblage, of structure, of control is 17th century Newtonian physics, and it's still there. But what we do is different. And if you get caught thinking that way, well, you're stuck with a lie. When you live in that world, you hope that the experience you have, the understanding you have, the knowledge you have, is going to help you through. And the reality is, hope is not a strategy. It's a wonderful thing to have. It's a beautiful thing to have. But it's not a strategy. We have to stop treating complex and chaotic work as if it's simply chaotic, as if it's simply complicated. We think if I bring the right practitioner, the right experienced person with the right guidebook, that everything is a Lego project. You give me the pieces, you give me the guidebook, you tell me what to do, I can do it. And that is not the state of where we are today. So let's get practical. Step number 1, practice. Practice a lot. Practice your craft all that you can, not because I want you to get better. That's not what I'm talking about. I want you to know yourself better. Practice so you know your tendencies. Practice so you know where you stand. Practice so you know what kind of context you're best in. Are you best in chaos? Are you best in complexity? Are you best in complicated? Or would you rather just work in the simple space? Know yourself, because you'll be able to add a ton of value when you understand who you are and how you work. Several years ago, on July 2nd, I know the date because we were 2 days away from July 4th. We were ready for a long weekend. We were ready to do nothing. That's what you do on the 4th of July. You barbecue and do nothing. And I was ready to do nothing. And we got a phone call from a client. Their website was struggling under the load, and somehow private data that they were collecting was getting commingled with other data. The way they knew this is because you would log in and give them your information, and on the receipt page, half the information would be yours, and half the information would be someone else's. This was a government entity, so first I said it, and then I did it. Give you a second to let that sink in. I'm like, we're in trouble. They started threatening to sue us right away. We had to, in that moment, shift from chaos, where we know absolutely nothing about how this has happened, to try and get it to complicated, where we could bring our skills. But we didn't have time to experiment. We had to act. Do this, do that, change this. And we started moving. And you know what I discovered? The lead developer on that project took 4 naps in the next 24 hours. Under stress, he just turned off. The rest of the team that wasn't involved in that project and I stayed up for 48 hours and skipped a barbecue to get this to a place where we could get through it and not get sued. And when that guy woke up from his naps, we had a conversation. I wasn't upset, and he just said, you know what I've figured out? I'm not good in these kinds of situations. I need to move to a team where I just do routine maintenance, and it's just not this overwhelming. That took a lot out of me. I could tell you at that time, I'm like, I just want you out. I don't want to see you. I don't know how you fell asleep 4 times in the middle of a day. And I like naps. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against the nap, but this is the wrong time to nap. But you know what? I just had to come alongside him and go, you figured out you. Let's get you to the right place. And he worked for us for 2 or 3 more years. Right? You need to practice so you know what situations you're best in. You've seen this movie maybe? You hear always be closing? As I was practicing this through, I was talking to Brian, a buddy of mine that works with me, and Brian said, I said, well, I want always be networking. He goes, no, always be connecting. And I'm like, ooh, you're so good. Still ABC. But in the quantum physics realm, in the world of new science, what we discover is we can't predict which relationships will impact and add value. So, build as many relationships as you can, because you have no idea where it will help you. You cannot predict. You will later be able to look back and say, that relationship really had a profound impact on my career or my life. But you cannot look at cause and effect up front that way. So build as many relationships as you can. Relationships are everything, right? Getting things done, navigating complexity, processing chaos, creating opportunity, all of it is powerful and driven by relationships. And notice, that's quantum mechanics. That's not Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics would say, no, just build the right building blocks. Get the right skills, get the right experience, get the right knowledge, and you'll have it made. It's not true. It's relationships. Experiment more. Try things. And some of you are going to say, well, I can't try things. I don't have time to try things. Trying things costs money. And so I'll tell you, raise your rates. I'm not lying. If you raise your rates, you'll have the capacity to experiment more. This is why, everywhere I go, some way, shape, or form, I'm going to try and tell you, raise your rates. Create margin. so that you can experiment, so you can learn more. And choose collaboration over control. For as much as we like control, the reality is success in the future will be driven by how strong attractors, how relationships and entanglement create new things, completely new things, out of the world we're in. You can't predict what those new things will be. Co-create with your customers, co-create with your staff, co-create with partners. The reality is, when we treat our projects like we're building chairs, we're hoping it works. We're just hoping that this is going to be a simple problem, or maybe a little complicated, and we'll get through it, right? We hope that predictability and control will save our day. And hope is not a strategy. My name's Chris Lema. I work at a company called Crowd Favorite. They have an office here in Denver. I blog over at chrislema.com, and you can find me on Twitter at @chrislema. Thank you very much.